Hey guys, Uncle Unit here. Today's video is a bit of a change up from my normal content as far as the format goes. This channel is known for scary stories, and today we'll listen to a tale of harsh reality, a robbery that took place at a restaurant over a decade ago. I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to conduct an interview with the very man who worked this case. He was kind enough to share this experience with us and give us an inside look from the perspective of a homicide detective. The names of both the victims and perpetrators have not been included in this video. Viewer discretion is advised.
Thinking back, it was a Saturday evening. My wife and I had plans to go out to dinner, and she was getting ready, and so was I. And then I get this call to respond to a robbery/homicide. So I told my wife, I said, we're going to have to take a rain check on dinner plans. I just got a call out. And she was good about it. You know, she was kind of used to it. On my on-call weekends, we have to take 2 cars everywhere we went because no doubt, you know, if I stayed home, I wouldn't even get a call. But as soon as we plan to do something, Murphy's Law kicks in and boom, I get a call out. But anyway, so I arrived at the scene. There were other detectives there that were actually working that evening. But I was the one in the homicide unit, so I was going to be the lead detective, and they had just done some preliminary work on the case. So I was briefed about what had happened, and this whole incident was caught on videotape. And so initially, all we had was some masked males, 2 of them, that had gone into the business and conducted a robbery. And you could actually see the shooter jump the counter. He left a footprint right on the counter. So let me back up a little bit. The gun comes out. It was a robbery. The young girl, the victim, the eventual victim, was trying to get the cash from the register. She was so nervous with the incident that she couldn't get the cash register open. Assuming that the murderer was upset by that, he jumped the counter and went behind the counter himself and opened the register. And it appeared to me as if he was actually punching numbers into the screen of the cash register, which I thought was odd. But in any event, the cash register drawer comes open, and he takes out the cash and puts it in his pocket. And there was a second girl there, that another worker. She was also there, and she was kind of freaked out in the corner of the front area, the food preparation area. And she wasn't doing anything other than just being scared and screaming. So he jumps the counter back onto the other side, and as he's leaving, money's already in his pocket. He's already done the robbery, and as he leaves, he pops off several rounds at the girl for no apparent reason other than he's just an animal. Maybe he didn't want to leave a witness behind or whatnot. I don't really know what the motivation was to actually kill her. And I don't know whether or not he intended to do that before he went into the robbery, but that's what he did. He pulled the trigger numerous times, striking the young victim, white female. She was young. She was 22 years old. She was a college student, and she was working in the evenings, to help her life get whatever, she's working for extra cash. And the gunman also popped another round off at the other female that was there. And she was hospitalized, but she survived the shooting. The other girl did not survive. She was killed instantly. She had several rounds that penetrated her vital organs in her torso area. And I'll never forget watching that video. There's not very many homicides that you work where you have a full video of the actual incident.
Right.
And you could see the gun going off, he pointing the gun, shooting. And then she falls back against the wall and she slides down the wall, leaving a smear of blood on the wall. And it was very disturbing. I was angered by this because, you know, he had already gotten the money. What was the point? Why kill her? And he was masked, okay? And he was wearing gloves. So other than him being on video, I don't understand why he would have had to do that. And that's why I was angered. Like, this is a senseless murder. Mm-hmm. You know, robberies are bad enough with firearms, but, you know, this is a senseless murder. So going into it that day, we had the video of the homicide, but we had masked people. We didn't know who they were. We couldn't see their faces. We just had general, you know, a description. We could surmise, you know, height and weight. I mentioned there was 2 that entered the restaurant. The second gunman was more of a lookout.
All right.
And he was standing in the area where people would walk up to order their food. And he was wearing one of those mechanic jumpsuits. You kind of slip into them and zip them all the way up.
One piece thing.
Yeah, the one piece thing, and with long sleeves. And he was also wearing a mask. He had a very distinctive, I would say, like a duck walk. He kind of wobbled back and forth when he walked. I thought that was a telltale sign of someone that we would maybe down the road be able to identify. If I just saw that wobble again, It was kind of weird, you know, thinking back now, but it was distinctive. It was something. When you analyze these videos, you're trying to pick up every possible detail that you can, because this is the only evidence you have. Plus, we did have a footprint, a footprint of you know, where he went over the counter. But that, thinking of the footprint now, and I'm just throwing this stuff out as it comes to my mind.
Right.
The footprint. After this shooting occurred, the second girl that was shot, she was able to run out of the store. And she went to a wing house that was directly next door. Mm-hmm. And she was asking for help. And a bunch of people, you could see, I call it the evidence wrecking crew, comes in. These were just citizens concerned, trying to lend a helping hand. Mm-hmm. So we worked a crime scene, very disturbing. We had to do a death notification of the parents. We don't do that kind of stuff over the telephone. Once we figured out who it was and who her parents were, and we got a good working address for them, we get a hold of the local police department from that town, and you know we give them a quick synopsis of the case and ask them to do a death notification for us, and then we have them call us, and so we can give them as much detail as we can. You know, keeping in mind this is a fluid investigation. There's a lot going on, but you know, I always stop what I'm doing and take time to at least to try to explain what's going on and you know, how they can come, when they can come, where to go, where the remains of the body, where that's going to be at the medical examiner's office, and we talk about you know, autopsies and things like that, you know, over the telephone after the death notification is made. So that was another rough part of this investigation. It seemed like it was one gut punch after another with this whole thing. I remember the next day, actually, this was on a Saturday, so on Monday morning, and I worked this case all throughout the weekend. We were trying to follow up on very sketchy leads. People were calling stuff in, and there were just wild goose chases. You know, people meaning well, they thought they saw something. But one of the things that we did is, you know, in watching the video, there was a white male that walked in and ordered a sandwich just minutes before the robbery. Mm-hmm. And so he walks out with his sandwich, he makes payment, he walks out of the store, and he's into the parking lot. So we thought that maybe he saw something.
Yeah.
Because these guys were obviously in the parking lot before they, assuming that they would have pulled into the parking lot somewhere close by. And so we put his image of his transaction on the media. So we did use the media in this particular case to try to solicit from people, does anybody know who this person is? Or hopefully the person sees himself, and says, hey, that's me, you know. And so that worked. I remember getting a call on Sunday, the next day, an individual called me and says, hey, I'm the guy in the video. So we had him come into the office, and we showed him, himself, and we established that one was in fact him. And we asked him if he had seen anything, and that was a dead end. But these are little things that come up during the investigation where you really hope, because we had nothing, you can't identify a mask or a person, we did have some clothing. We had very distinctive clothing that we were looking for, but God, there must be a zillion people that wear that kind of jacket. I remember he was wearing a brown jacket, the shooter now, wearing like a brown hoodie with a white stripe going across the back and some striping down the sleeves. But, that's, who notices that? There could have been a million of those jackets sold. But it was something, if we were to find a suspicious person and they had that kind of clothing, that would certainly help down the road. So portions of this murder were broadcast. Initially, let me back up. We did broadcast that in the media, but we didn't do that right away because what we wanted to do first is broadcast it in our jail. Yeah. Because we figure, okay, these guys are probably local. They've probably been in and out of jail their whole lives, and there could be somebody in our own jails that might know who these people are. So we have a closed circuit television thing in our jail, and we played the video of not the whole entire murder scene, but enough of it where if somebody knew someone in that video, maybe they would, of course they'd want some type of consideration for their charges, but and that's why we did it. We did that in the hopes that maybe somebody in our own jail system would know who these people before we put it out to the media. And then when that didn't come up with any leads, we immediately put it out in the media, and we began working these leads coming in from people. Oh, I think it's so and so, and then so now you run a check on that person they think it is, and then you look at their physical characteristics, and then you go find them and talk to them. And this went on for weeks. Still nothing. Then about 3 weeks into this investigation, maybe not quite that long, I get a phone call on a weekend again. I'm off, but I get a phone call from our dispatcher, and the dispatcher tells me, hey, we got this guy on the line that says he has some information and he's willing to talk. And I said, great. Just have him come to the district office and I'll meet him there. I'll get there as soon as I can. So this particular individual was a friend of the guy that was the lookout shooter inside he didn't actually do any shooting, but he had a gun and he was the lookout, the guy that was wearing a mechanic jumpsuit. He says, I know who that person is. He identifies him. And I'm going to leave the names out of this because there's still some post-conviction stuff going on in the court system. And so okay, I didn't want to get into any names or whatnot, because this is, even though the investigation is over and we did make an arrest in this eventually, and we'll get into how that all happened. But in any event, this individual, this informant, he wanted to remain anonymous as long as possible, and we honored that as far as we could. He named the individual who was the person that was in being the lookout. He also tells us that this person had confessed to him or had confided in him that he was in fact involved with this situation. And he also told us where all the clothing was that was used and one of the guns. And it turns out that the clothing that not only and this kid was the informant was probably maybe 17 years old, 17, 18 years old. The individual he was naming was 16 years old.
Oh.
16. Again, he was masked. He was a big kid. Obviously, he looked like a full-grown man to me, but he was 16 years old. Mm. And so, again, another gut punch, you know. It's like, what's our society coming to? What's going on in our country that a 16-year-old could involve themselves in something like this? But I mean, you hear all these horror stories, but when you're in the middle of it and you're having to investigate it, it's tough, especially when you have kids. Yeah. You know, and so anyway, this information that he gave us led us to a car that belonged to the lookout's mother. And we were really fortunate to get this information when we did, because that car was going to be moved. And that stuff that was in there, that evidence, was going to get moved. And so based on his information, I immediately sent a marked patrolman to go out and stand by at the car. You know, his instructions were not to let anyone in or out of that car. Just stand by. We're going to be writing a search warrant for it, and we'll be there as soon as we can with the paperwork. So I immediately started writing a search warrant, had to go find the judge, call the prosecutor. There's a process in getting a warrant. You see people getting warrants on TV and they flash a piece of paper, but it's a long process. You have to sit down and you have to basically write a narrative of your investigation and put as much detail in there as possible. And then you have to, you know, this paperwork not only has to be approved by your own people, by your supervisor, but then it has to be read and approved by the prosecutor, the state attorney who's going to be prosecuting this case. And you know, we work very closely with our state attorney on a case like this. Not all cases involve a prosecutor being with you throughout the entire investigation. Usually the police will do their investigation and then present a case to a prosecutor. Well, murders, they work a little different. We work hand in hand with the prosecutors. They're with us every step of the way. They may not be knocking doors and, you know, breaking doors down and doing stuff like that, the hazardous stuff. But they're there. They're listening to interviews. They're very much involved. And so I write the search warrant, get with the prosecutor, get that approved, find a judge, get the judge to approve it, and then we get the warrant, and we responded back to the car. We opens the car for us, and then we found a book bag, and in the book bag we found several masks. We found a firearm. We found thinking back now, this is 14 years ago, so. It was a revolver. I don't remember if it was a 38 or a 32 caliber, but it was a revolver. Masks. We found the jumpsuit. We found a pair of sneakers, some Air Jordan sneakers. Size, it was, I forget the size now, but it was like a 12 or something pretty big. And this was a huge find for us, because even back in 2004, we had DNA. We were using DNA evidence. You know, we were able to get DNA profiles from clothing and from objects and things like that. So possible fingerprints on the firearm. This was huge. And not only that, the car itself, you know, whoever left that stuff there could have left their fingerprints behind. So once we have this evidence, now we have identified one of the people involved in this murder. So we went from a case with absolutely nothing other than a video, and now we've got a named suspect, 16-year-old. I remember contacting his parent and telling her not all the details of what was going on, but enough details so that she could make a decision whether or not she was going to allow her son to speak with law enforcement. And that's something too that your audience needs to know. If you're investigating a minor, someone under the age of 18, a 16-year-old probably does have the mental ability to be able to make a decision whether or not they want to speak to law enforcement or not, but that's still a young person. It's still a minor. And so you have to make an attempt to contact the parent before you conduct that type of an interview, especially something this serious where a person can be going to prison for the rest of their lives. And so the parent was involved. She actually came to the scene when we were towing her car away and finding all this evidence, and she made quite a bit of scene there. And so she gathered that something bad had happened, and we wanted to speak to her son. And I calmed her down and took her to the side and said, "This is what we're investigating." I gave her some of the details, but not all. You don't want to show your hand because, you don't want information out there that somebody could repeat later. In other words, if I'm interviewing a suspect and there's a bunch of information that went out to the media or people are talking about, details of the case, you want to be able to have those details come out in an interview that wasn't public knowledge, that wasn't knowledge that they could have learned from someone else, that they themselves had to have been there to know that particular thing, whatever it is that we're talking about. So you have to be very careful when you speak with parents and careful not to give out details that could come out in an interview later, and then have a defense attorney say, well, yes, he knew that because he heard it from his mother or from a friend or from the media, that kind of stuff. So got to keep all these different things in mind when you're dealing with people. But she did, in fact, give us permission to interview her son, and she requested to be present, and we honored that. So where the car was towed from and where we found the evidence, it was literally probably a half a block from our district office. So we literally just walked over to the district office and went into an interview room, and the mother was there. In the initial interview, he denied any knowledge, any involvement, but he had talked about things that he had heard on the street. And this is where we get the name of the actual shooter. Okay. During this interview, he names who the shooter is. He knows because he was there, but he made it sound, oh, I just heard this through the grapevine. I just heard this on the street. This is what people are saying. I had nothing to do with it. I wasn't there, but this is what I heard. So we took that information. We run the name. We look at the profile of the person. Remember earlier I told you that he was punching numbers on the screen.
Oh, yeah.
And the register came open. Well, after finding out that he was an employee, he probably knew how to open that register. He knew what code to put in, whatever that entails. He had knowledge of it, and that's why he did that. And that's why he got frustrated with the victim that he shot, because she was so nervous she couldn't even remember whatever the code was to get the register open. But here he is punching numbers and the thing comes open. So we also find out obviously his name, but when I did his profile, the height and the weight match. This guy had very long fingers. Okay, I remember from the video, he just had long fingers and they kind of curled up. I told you, when we look at these videos, we're looking at every detail that you can. And I just remember this guy having long fingers, and then looking at his photographs and stuff that we had on file, I said, this is our guy. This is definitely him. So he knows. But that's not enough. That's not enough to arrest him. But if you remember, we have a gun that we found from the car. Come to find out, I got notified by a detective from a local agency, not our agency, an agency within our county, that they were working a series of robberies themselves, and that in several of these robberies, a firearm was fired. Guy came in, did a robbery, shot a round up into a ceiling, was one of them. And I thought that was very significant. So We were able, through ballistics, some other evidence, which is ballistics, firearms, through ballistics, we were able to tie the gun that we found in the car not only to the body of the victim, because remember we had projectiles inside the victim, which our medical examiner was able to take from her, recover from her, I should say. But the round that was fired off at the robbery from the other agency also matched the same gun. So we knew the guy that did the murder was also responsible for these other armed robberies in the area. Now that's pretty damning evidence, okay? We brought the kid back, the non-shooter. We brought him back for another interview, presented him with all this information, and he finally confessed. He confessed to his involvement. I remember in my mind back then strategizing how I'm going to speak to this individual, how I was going to approach this. And in many of the interviews that I've conducted over the years, what I've always tried to do is to get into the mind, the psyche of the person, and try to minimize this horrible thing that they have done. Because if they think that you think they're a piece of you know what and have done something horrible, they may not open up to you. But if you try to minimize what happened and try to almost justify in their minds why it happened, sometimes the information will come out. And that's what I did in this case. Like, poor guy, you're only 16 years old, peer pressure. Turns out the shooter was only 18, but he's 2 years older. When you're that age, an 18-year-old, they're already an adult. They can do things that they at 16 can't, Mm-hmm. But anyway, that was how I approached it, minimize his involvement. Hey, you didn't shoot anybody. You didn't mean for this to happen. You probably just went in there. You were just going to rob a few dollars. And, yeah, you had a gun in your hand, but you weren't going to kill anybody. And you didn't think your friend was going to kill anybody, right? That kind of stuff. So that was eventually how we were able to get the truth. So sometimes law enforcement has to use tactics to get to, but you're always the end result and the goal of using these tactics is to get to the truth.
Right.
And so it worked. He confessed to his own involvement in it, and he also identified a third person that was driving the car. So we had 3 suspects. Now we had a name of the driver. So we go out and get the driver, and of course he denied any involvement. But during the interview, this second suspect, the non-shooter that was inside, he told us that the driver had gone in and cased the place an hour or 2 before the actual robbery. So we should have him on video, right? So then we backed up the video, and sure enough, the guy he identified as the driver is seen walking in. He goes to the bathroom, comes back out, doesn't buy anything, and walks out of the restaurant. So he's basically counting how many employees are there, who's there, are there any guys there, is it all females, whatever reason that they did that. And I'm just thinking, this is, if it were me, I want to know how many people are in there, how many potential fighters I'm going to have to deal with. Mm-hmm. Are these female? Are they males? Are they big guys, little guys? I want to know this kind of stuff before I do a robbery. And that's exactly what he was doing. So we get him identified and track him down, tracked his parents down. He was 19. He was the oldest one of the crew. He should have known better. But come to find out during his interview, he confesses to his involvement. He had no idea that a murder was going to happen. He knew that there was going to be a robbery. He didn't know that there were going to be guns until they literally pulled the guns out and walked out of his car, which we didn't believe that. But, that, again, trying to minimize his involvement, the truth came out. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it takes 3 and 4 tries. You get bits of information. It's just human nature not to just give it all out at once. You just kind of have to pull it out little by little. And so here we are 3 weeks later, we had nothing, and then just the dominoes just start falling for us. Once we had him, the shooter, identified, we go looking for him. He's on the run now. He knows we're after him. We bring in his father. His father was a deacon of a church.
Oh, really?
Christian man. So I thought, okay, here's an opportunity to try to get him on our side. Understanding that that's his son. Don't know what the relationship is between he and his son, whether they're close or not close, what he would think about his son being involved in a murder/robbery. But knowing that he was a Christian deacon of a church, okay, I tried to appeal to his sense of morality, his sense of right and wrong. And I tried to tell him that, his son being on the run is a very, very dangerous thing for him and for law enforcement and any potential innocent bystanders that were around. And, again, he didn't want to see anybody hurt. And we played on that. And he promised me that he would find where his son is and bring him to us because he was concerned that we would kill him. And I said, well, the only way that would happen is if we had to defend ourselves. If he, had a firearm and tried to engage us, yes, we're going to potentially kill him. But that's not what, if he could bring him to us peacefully, that's plan A every time. We don't want to hurt people. We don't want bad things to occur. This is bad enough already. We didn't need any more bloodshed. So one thing that we also did is we played the video for him. Before he came out with cooperating with us, I wanted him to see. Mm-hmm. And again, maybe he could identify the jacket. Maybe he could identify, even though it's a masked person, if it's my son, I know my son. I don't have to see his face. I know it's him. By the way he walks, his mannerisms, it's my son, okay? And it's the same thing with him. I was hoping to show him this video and he would identify whatever he could potentially identify from the video. And he was shocked, but he never identified his son. And I understand that, okay? As a parent, having children, I understand where he was coming from. I tried to appeal to his sense of right and wrong. Like, if you know something, you need to tell. But, this was an African-American man and a family. They've had run-ins with law enforcement in the past with his son. So maybe they weren't trusting of the police, mm-hmm. which is understandable. So I was fortunate that several days later, we get a phone call. And it's from a desk person. And he says, hey, there's Mr. So-and-so here with his son. Says they want to talk to you. And I paused for a minute. And I said, sir, do you realize that we have an active warrant for first-degree murder on that guy? Are you there by yourself? He pauses. He says, kind of, sort of, but I'm sure there's other officers in the building. I said, well, call a couple down and put him in handcuffs. I'm on my way. So just stuff that comes up. Like, I thought I assumed that the father would bring in his son and tell the officer, here's my son, he's wanted for murder. Oh. But he didn't do that. He just said, we need to speak with Detective so-and-so. And not telling the officer, who has no clue who these people are, what's going on. And he's got a guy that committed a murder sitting right there in his lobby. So yeah, that was a little tense moment there, but it worked out. They were completely cooperative. And I called another detective to come with me. We like to tag team people for several reasons. You heard about the good cop, bad cop, and that's just one of many tactics that can be used. But the main reason is you can't think of everything yourself. You got so much going on. You have so many questions you want to cover, you're going to forget stuff, So I called another detective who was intimately involved with this case with me from the very beginning. We didn't know that he was going to get turned in that night, so we didn't have the time to really sit and prepare. Even though we're living this case for going on almost a month now, that's why I called another guy, another detective with me, so that we could tag team him together. But he shot us down pretty quick. He lawyered up, which is his total right to do, and that's fine. That just means he just didn't want to talk. He didn't want to answer any questions. He wanted an attorney, and that's fine. But that doesn't mean that I can't talk. Mm. Just because you lawyer up and don't want to talk, that's fine. But I don't have to shut up. I could keep talking. And so I did that, trying to appeal to his, if he had any conscience at all. Like, yeah, we understand you want to talk to a lawyer, and that's probably a good idea. But let me show you something. So you start putting photographs out of the crime scene, and, I want you to understand what you're lawyering up for. I want you to have a full understanding of what's going on. Mm. And, who these victims are. I want you to know their names and their families. I want you to have every detail in your mind so that, you're going to need that attorney. And that's fine. But here you go. Put it out. And just to see what the reaction is, just to see, what if they change their minds? What if they decide, okay, I do want to talk to you? You don't know. You can't anticipate. It's not the reason we do it, but I just, again, I lived this for a month. I got one gut punch after another, and here's a guy sitting right in front of me. But he did not confess. He lawyered up, and he never confessed. He went to trial. He was convicted in court. The other two individuals cut deals. The 16-year-old ended up getting 40 years in return for his involvement. In Florida, we have a thing called felony murder. You don't have to be the one to pull the trigger to be charged with the murder, okay? If you're the getaway driver, if you're there, if you're actively participating, help to conspire to do this murder, it's as if you're the one who pulled the trigger. You're just as guilty as the guy who pulled the trigger. It's called felony murder. It can be easily looked up. And so that's what these guys were facing, felony murder. They could have also gotten life sentences themselves. So they chose to testify against the shooter in consideration for their charges. And so, walking in with a firearm, we have a minimum mandatory sentencing for people who commit felonies with firearms in Florida. And so when you get 40 years, it turns out this individual, the 16-year-old, was also involved in the other robberies. Mm-hmm. So, he got 40 years, and he'll have to probably do 85 to 90% of that time. So he's still sitting in prison. His formidable years, he won't be out till he was 16, in his 50s. Mm. Imagine living the rest of your life in prison. The getaway driver got 5 years. That seemed kind of low, but he was out in the car. We couldn't prove that he knew that they were going to use guns, other than the fact that, he saw them leaving with the guns from his car. At that point, he could have drove off and reported this, but is that really realistic? Are you going to do that with your two buddies that, you're there to do some type of a robbery? In your mind, you think it's a strong arm robbery, which would not involve a firearm. It's just a robbery without firearms, and call it strong arm robbery. Does that make it any better? Or, it's like, so he got the 5 years, so he's out. Yeah, but that's, when you asked, that was the case that eventually led to me leaving the homicide unit. I left. I requested a reassignment after this case. I worked it with everything I had, and it took so much out of me for almost a month and a half. And that's, things don't stop when you make an arrest. They're just getting started in the system. So it's court appearances, depositions, motions to suppress evidence, Even after the trial, which was almost a year later, we have post-conviction hearings. They're challenging certain things about DNA, trying to bring up new evidence that wasn't, supposedly found back then. And none of it has worked. He's still sitting in prison serving his life sentence. He got life. He didn't, because he was 18. The prosecutor decided not to pursue the death penalty.
16?
Well, on the shooter was 18. The second guy was 16. So he plea bargained his case down to 40 years, which is basically, it's not life without parole, but it's the next one down in the step. It's life, but it's not life without parole. So he does have the possibility of getting out as long as he follows the rules in prison. And so the 18-year-old, he got life without the possibility of parole. So he'll spend the rest of his life in there. But that's the case. Like I was saying, was the one that broke the camel's back. I had worked many cases leading up to that, but this particular one, I lived it for a month, and I don't remember getting sleep. Just thinking about this, and it was a high-profile case because of it's a young girl. So that's it. On that case, anyway.
Okay. I'll ask a couple more questions, and we'll go ahead and wrap it up.
Sure.
Has there ever been an interrogation that you've conducted that has gotten out of hand?
Not on my part, on the suspect's part.
Yeah.
I've had suspects, our interview, usually there's a table between us, and it's not bolted to the ground or anything like that. And I've had suspects just get up and flip the table over and, bow up and want to fight. Depending on the charge, usually these people are handcuffed. But I don't like to have somebody in handcuffs behind their back sitting in a chair. It's an uncomfortable thing, okay? Especially when you're trying to buddy up to somebody to get information. So many times they're uncuffed, or they're cuffed in the front, and they can still be a danger to you if they're handcuffed in front of their body as opposed to their back, behind their back. So yes, I've had suspects get up and flip tables over and try to fight. And again, that's another reason why you always want a second person there. And most of the time, these interviews are being conducted inside a police district, a police office. There's other officers around, so if the shit hits the fan, there's usually plenty of people to come rushing in and help out. It's never gotten to that point, but I've had tables flipped over and guys bow up and want to fight.
You've pretty much answered everything else in that first story that you were telling. The final question is, what's the best advice you can give someone who's looking to get into this kind of work?
Well, if you're a family man and you love being around your children and your wife and you love doing things family-oriented, this is not the line of work for you. I would recommend you not do this. It's a very rewarding job. Don't get me wrong. I enjoyed the time. I spent 4 years in the homicide unit, and I enjoyed working with the people. It's a great sense of satisfaction solving these cases for these families that have gone through a traumatic experience, but it is a very demanding job. It's like at one point I said, I'm married to my wife, not to the job. I have to leave this. I don't want to leave the sheriff's office. I want to still be a detective, but I want to do something that's not so demanding on my personal time, to do a job that's not only time, but just you think about this stuff. Even when you're off and you're trying to enjoy your family, you have this constant burden of, wow, I still have to do this and this and this, and I have to testify here, and I got to go there. It's like a weight on you. It never goes away. And so I decided to get into white collar crime. I said, who's going to call me at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning on a holiday weekend for a check case, a credit card case, or an identity theft case? It's not going to happen. That can wait till in the morning. It's only money. So, people are victimized, and it's a traumatic experience when you lose money, but it's not murder. when you compare the two, it's not the same. And it's not the same type of pressure, and media attention is not so much on those type of cases. So I decided to get into economic crimes, and I finished out my career working economic crimes.
I'll go ahead and ask one more question. Do TV shows do a good job of accurately portraying crime scenes and detective work?
Yes and no. Yes, as far as what is available out there in technology to solve cases, but it's unrealistic in that it doesn't happen as fast as you see it on TV show. A DNA profile might take weeks to get. In TV shows, it's like a matter of minutes. They already know who the person is. That's just not. It's just not how it works. But the actual technologies that you see in the shows do exist, but just not to the speed. It's how these investigations get coordinated on television. Everything just kind of falls in line, and that's just not realistic. These investigations is a long, drawn out process. About the only TV show that I can say accurately portrays, and it's not even a dramatization, it's a real life show. It's The First 48. Those are actual cases. Those are actual detectives working actual crimes. So
that's what it's called, The First 48.
The First 48. I think it's on, I forget what channel it's on. It'll come to me maybe. But yeah, people can look it up. It's The First 48, because these are, they'll go to a particular city or a particular town and sit with the homicide unit. And when they get a call, they're with them every step of the way, and the first 48, the reason it's called the first 48, because those first 48 hours are crucial to gathering evidence. Once cases start going cold, in the example I gave, we were just fortunate that we had an informant call us. It was several weeks later, but my God, it was great information, and it led to, it led to the case getting solved.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time.
Yes.
I think this was a great interview, and we'll go ahead and end it there.